What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you solo today for a little bit of trade deadline talk. If you are listening to this on your podcast feed, this precedes an episode that Grant and I did. If you're watching it on YouTube, it's standalone, and you can look for that episode with Grant and I. Will be coming out on Tuesday. We will, however, be covering the NBA trade deadline around these parts in earnest. It's Monday, January 8th when this goes live. That's 1 month out from the 2024 NBA trade deadline. And I found a lot of the discourse fascinating this year. And I think that we're shaping up for what could be a bonkers NBA trade deadline, but is what's going to be one of the more fascinating NBA trade deadlines that we've seen. We had Woj right before the OG Anunoby trade say it could be a slow trade deadline. Then OG Anunoby gets traded. I believe it was before OG got traded. That happens every year, not with just Woj specifically, but there are these warnings of there's going to be a lot of chatter, no movement. And we've definitely had trade deadlines at different scales, but every year there is some level of madness, even if it's not an all NBA type player being moved. We could have multiple of those caliber players moved this trade deadline. When you're looking at all NBA is probably a stretch for everyone except Pascal Siakam, who's left, been tearing it up lately. By the way, Zach LaVine, all-star caliber player. Lauri Markkanen, all-star caliber player. Dejounte Murray, kind of fringe. People are down on him, but that contract is super interesting. There can also just be surprise names that crop up every year. And I'm intrigued for so many reasons, because you look at not just some of the names that are out there, and there's this element of, okay, well, what are the Raptors doing? Are they going to move Siakam? I've not done a complete 180 on this. It just would not surprise me if the plan is to keep him because he's so good. And what is the path? Like some of the trade packages that are being mentioned for Pascal Siakam just blow my mind. This is someone who's going to, at bottom, require multiple first-round picks and probably a nice young player or useful veteran players, because the Raptors don't look like they're going for that hard reset based off what they prioritized in the OG Anunoby return. I do expect, though, this is not to say that I think that no stars are going to get moved. If I had to pick, between DeJounte, Zach LaVine, Pascal Siakam, I would say at least one of those guys get moved. I would say Dejounte Murray gets moved too. If you don't consider him a star, that's fine. And let's just not forget about some of the surprise players when you go through. There's always a team, it feels like, that is just going to shock us, whether they make this buy type of move or if they start to sell. Look, Brooklyn hovering at 9th in the Eastern Conference as I record this, 5 games under 500. Could they look at moving Mikal Bridges if the offer is right? Everyone expects Dorian Finney-Smith or Royce O'Neal. Maybe Nick Claxton gets involved in that. I just don't think we can rule out something like that. Or maybe the Rockets decide to move on from Jalen Green. Do the Thunder decide to look at Josh Giddey? This is, to me, though, what makes the trade deadline so fascinating this year is we've now been so entrenched in the playing competitive landscape that by extension, there are so many could be, would be, should be, might be, actually are buyers. And that has basically been the case since the play-in and started. And we've tried to identify teams. Oh, well, let's use as an example. Okay, the Jazz. I'm recording this. They're 2 losses outside the play-in. They are about to play through one of the most brutal stretches of the year for any team, I think. They could decide not to make a move because they have all the picks that they need. And I think you're running into this with some of the other rebuilding teams. I guess New Orleans and the Oklahoma City Thunder are not rebuilding. But when you've gotten, in Utah's case, all these picks already, and you have some other future first rounders on the balance, if you're San Antonio, there's not going to be that urgency necessarily to sell. Or you're a team like the Pistons that's kind of stuck in this malaise, and you don't really have, you could really use extra first round equity. You don't have players who are going to get that by themselves. I don't know how much Bojan Bogdanovic, who is probably your best non-core trade asset at this point, how much is he going to fetch you? You probably need to stack players on top of one another or look at moving a Jaden Ivey if you wanted to get any real meaningful first round equity back. And yes, and so there's that team like a Detroit where, okay, they could sell, but how much do they actually have to sell? That's going to complicate the trade deadline. I think what's also going to be mega fascinating is you have these really good player types. Jeremy Grant in Portland, even though there's been messaging that Portland doesn't want to move him. Portland would absolutely move him if the offer is right. Kyle Kuzma in Washington, that was a deal. It is declining in scale moving forward. That was signed so they could trade. What is the line in the sand going to be, though, for those teams? Are those sort of mid-end type of players going to get dealt on the same level as an OG Anunoby? Is probably better then Jeremy Grant over OG right now is probably, yeah, I think that's right. But on that level of player, what's the asking price going to be? Because you can set it and say, well, we want a first round pick and a young player or 2 first round picks. Who's giving you that? That's what else makes this trade deadline incredibly fascinating. Some of the teams that you would expect to be most aggressive, or many of them, like they're just pick poor. Milwaukee already played the Damian Lillard card. The Lakers can only trade 1 first round pick. The Clippers can only trade 1 first round pick and already acquired James Harden. You have these teams at the top. Okay, Boston has all, I think they have first round picks that they could trade. They don't have all their own first. That was a stupid thing to say. They have first round picks that they could trade. They have very little salary matching. When they're mentioned for Kelly Olynyk or Chris Boucher, what's the money that's going out to get that? If you're not building some super complex deal with too many players involved, they're not just going to trade Al Horford, who's still important to their team. They're not just going to trade Drew Holiday or Derek White, who's been playing his ass off this year. So that's a team that's probably going to be, a lot of other teams might be more married to the buyout market. Oh, wait, though, certain players you can't sign in the buyout market. If they make more than the current mid-level exception, you're not going to be able to go to a team that's with inside the first apron, the salary cap, about $7 million over the luxury tax. Excuse me. That's what I meant. And so you have the top, the tippy top, but then there's also, you look at the element of the Clippers, and if they're willing to move some players who are kind of important, if they're not married to the Norm Powell salary, if they can attach that first round pick to PJ Tucker, they can actually make a pretty big splash. And so are they going to play that card? The Lakers, that distant first round pick is intriguing. Are they going to pull the lever of, do we go get Zach LaVine? Is it somebody else? Is DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso the answer? And then that's going to lead you to the other question, the existential questions for, and I want to get into more of that, the Lakers Warriors stuff, but the Bulls are mentioned as this, the Bulls, the Raptors, and the Hawks are all mentioned as these teams that are just, they could be wild sellers. They could both also go in the other direction. I don't think Chicago should, but we've seen a track record that they will try and throw good money after bad. The Hawks been playing a little bit better lately. They are going to be cash conscious. It looks like they're open for business on anyone not named Trae Young or Jalen Johnson. So yes, they could be the team that defines the deadline if they move DeAndre Hunter and Clint Capella and Dejounte Murray and Bogdan Bogdanovic. They could also be a team that talks themselves into, okay, well, we're still right there in the play-in. Are the Bulls going to fall off? We could make some type of move. We know the Raptors are already willing to think like that. We saw them do it just last season. If you're going to keep Pascal Siakam and you've acquired Emmanuel Quickley, who you're going to pay, you've acquired RJ Barrett, you owe that top 6 protected pick to San Antonio this year, you could be a team that actually goes for it. And so there's this very, I would say, unique push and pull, maybe even on an existential level for so many of these teams that are trying to figure out what to do. And I do think, even if you believe that this type of stuff exists out there every season, and there's definitely always the surplus of buyers, the dynamic this season, though, where it feels like we're seeing if not a changing, a shifting of the guard, looking at Minnesota and OKC just blowing up the standings. And then also at the bottom of that end, where you have these teams that might be fading out. Golden State, for one, are they a team that kind of has to decide? They are a team that has to decide, are we going to go for it now? Or do we just start leaning into the young kids and it's really time to start thinking about moving Draymond Green and Klay Thompson? I can't imagine they would move Steph unless he asked for out. I would expect, just because that's how things go in this situation, they will inevitably favor the immediate timeline. But then what does that mean? Yeah, you could say, okay, Jonathan Kuminga gone, Moses Moody gone, but is Andrew Wiggins gone? Are they going to move Chris Paul following his fractured hand? He is out 4 to 6 weeks, by the way, still an expiring contract that could be used in moves. I think it probably makes it more likely that he's moved now that he's injured than it was before, to be quite honest with you, just because they don't have 4 to 6 weeks to buy this time. That's the trade deadline at that point. And unless you believe that, okay, well, Draymond will still be on the court at that point, maybe Klay continues to play better on the offensive end, we can make a run as is. I don't see it. They could just go the other route, though, where it's, well, we're really going to lean into the kids. And this kind of starts a different type of movement there. We're seeing it with the Lakers right now, where I think probably too much of the blame is falling on Darvin Ham. I don't love the personnel that they have there to begin with. Could they make a coaching change? We know they're not going to all of a sudden start selling, but then what is the buy move that they do? How all in do they go? Do they give up that 29 or 2030 first round pick? And who's it for? Do they view DeMar DeRozan as worth that? Even though I think functionally he's not a great fit for them on the offensive end? Do they roll the dice on Zach LaVine, whose salary structure certainly complicates things for them moving forward? Or is there an opportunity out there that's not being discussed, or one that's been tangentially discussed? We mentioned it. We were way ahead of this on a podcast saying it's only a matter of time before they register interest in Dejounte Murray. They entered the Dejounte Murray sweepstakes. I can't remember who reported it, but that was like a week ago or a few days ago that it was mentioned. And so they're going to be another wild card team. Then you just have your normal, the contenders, the good teams that are going to be looking to make upgrades, however marginal. We mentioned Boston or Milwaukee. What can they actually do? Can Milwaukee get a point of attack defender? How much does Dennis Smith Jr. cost? Can they get a flyer on Davion Mitchell, depending on what the Kings want for him? But beyond them, though, the Sixers are sitting here with these assets. Joel Embiid is injured. Tyrese Maxey's on this meteoric rise. They have a need for either another ball handler, another wing type. I don't think they're going to go all in midseason. That just doesn't feel like Daryl Morey style at this point because of the cap flexibility he's about to have this summer. But they could do something. They could straddle that line. Yeah, maybe it's a low end acquisition, or where they're just it's someone who's on expiring contract. They're using some of their middle end salaries below the D'Anthony Melton tier to step ladder their way to get somebody. Or do they do something in the middle? They've been mentioned for Dejounte Murray, not a fit that I particularly love. And we look at these teams, like a team like the Knicks, who just acquired OG Anunoby, which opens up different avenues for them to now try, because they do need another ball handler creation. That's why Dejounte Murray is being mentioned so much, although Deuce McBride the other night in Philly was basically like, yeah, fuck you. That's not happening. They're a team that could still do something pretty sizable, and they're going to be buying. Then there are these teams that I feel like the Pacers, the Magic, teams that people want to buy or to make that move, to get the Magic shooting, to get the Pacers a combo wing or forward. By the way, I'm warming up to the idea of Pascal Siakam in Indiana more and more. I don't know if that displeases Pacers fans or not. I've been more so they need to skew 3-4. I'm kind of just at the point where I look at them, and it'd be really nice to have that secondary creator or second creator, just to call it, in the playoffs. And Pascal Siakam, for all his flaws, he's shown he can do that before. Warming up to that idea. But are they going to give up enough to get him from Toronto? Because you're not going to get stuff without giving up stuff. And then there are these other Oklahoma City, you could throw in the Pacers Magic tier too. They're second in the West, but everyone wants them to make a trade. They can do whatever they want. They could do nothing just because they've been playing so well. They could do something that's kind of on the margins where it's, like Trey Mann and Poku, they're not going to be around here, so we'll just sort of flip them, roll them into seconds or whatever we could get. They could do something on the middle end of the spectrum. I think they're a team that should at least think about. This is not my first move for them. They should at least think about Dejounte Murray, where if you move Giddey's minutes to Murray's minutes, he is a better off-ball fit. He's a better defender. You lose rebounding. You do lose some playmaking there. I think that they need the shot creation in the playoffs more, as good as their half-court offense has been this season. And that's somebody who doesn't cost you the whole kit and caboodle. I don't even know if he cost you Josh Giddey, quite frankly. I would not, and by the way, I would keep Casey Wallace over Josh Giddey at this point if it came down to it. They're also a team that could they could go all in, but they won't. It's not even worth mentioning. I don't know where Lauri Markkanen falls on that end of the spectrum for them. That's someone who I love for OKC, and that's not really unique. That's been said a bunch at this point. I could also see them being the team that you're sort of rolling your Davis Bertans salary into another salary that you can then move over the offseason or try and rehabilitate. Is it John Collins? There's 2 years left on his deal after this one. I mentioned Lonzo Ball as a joke, just as the Bulls were looking to save money after this season. He's starting to run again. I don't think you acquire him with the intention of him being a part of your team. But if you just take a flyer on Lonzo Ball so you have that expiring money into next season that you can then use in a trade, that is something that would be very much on OKC's level. Minnesota doesn't have a ton, but I've started to think if you start baking in pick swaps along with Leonard Miller's generating a lot of buzz from what he's done in the G League. And you do have some salary matching tools in Kyle Anderson, Shake Milton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, guys who are making more of the minimum. Are you willing to move off of Naz Reid if you're that married to the Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert tier? As I think it was Dane Moore had mentioned this, Reid, after what I thought was a terrific start, has not been as good defensively this season. So are you willing to look at moving him to go get in service of another shot creator point guard type to help manage your offense when Anthony Edwards is off the floor, or maybe just to pair with Anthony Edwards in certain moments if you don't think Mike Conley's always going to be an answer, who, by the way, Mike Conley's going to be a free agent after this season. Minnesota, I don't know what the cost is on him. And I think if I'm Atlanta, I'm hanging up the phone just because I don't think this is enough. But if you start putting Minnesota's best possible offer on the table, where it's Leonard Miller. Are you intrigued by Wendell Moore or Josh Minot and some of these pick swaps? And then it's getting these lower cost salaries, some of which are coming off the books, like a Dejounte Murray trade for them or a Bogdan Bogdanovic trade for them if they could swing it, just like to get that guy in there. I don't know if Minnesota would look at it as, well, then we just have 6 starters. If you're getting a type of Bogdanovic is an easier sell off the bench, but if it's Dejounte Murray and all of a sudden you have Cat, Gobert, Murray, and Conley and Jaden McDaniels, it's a lot of players. But you could futz and fiddle with your closing lineup, especially given how just odd Jaden McDaniels this season has been. He's dealt with injuries. So the Nuggets, they're not, I wouldn't expect them to do anything because they're so married to this youth movement, and they're going to be so good when it matters most. It's like they're a team which you look at, okay, we know what they're going to do at the trade deadline. It's kind of ditto for just like the Charlotte Hornets. They might trade Terry Rozier, they might trade Gordon Hayward, but nothing of like super consequence one way or the other for them. That might be underestimating the season Terry Rozier has had, though. What's the asking price for him? That falls into that mid end of, well, what does it cost to get Kuzma? What does it cost to get Jeremy Grant? My guess would be if we don't see at least 2 of Markkanen, LaVine, Siakam, Murray traded, and plus surprise star X, we're going to see a lot of the Kuzma level, Jeremy Grant level, Terry Rozier type moves, because there are teams out there that just need that extra leg. And I think that the lack of sellers almost increases the likelihood that, or not even just the lack of sellers, the lack of clarity on who is going to sell and which of the should-be buyers will actually buy. Again, I'm referencing the Magic, the Thunder. How aggressive will a team like the Timberwolves be, or the Clippers be, just because they have some assets? How aggressive are the Kings going to be? They have very clear needs or two. They've been mentioned to Siakam. They were the favorites, and then an hour and a half later, they weren't. They were facing the Raptors that night. That's how those things work. Can they get in on some wing defense or additional point of attack defender who doesn't shrink the floor for you offensively, or a big who protects the rim but is also a good offensive fit around Sabonis? I don't know who I just described. Maybe Chris Boucher. I feel like I'm contractually obligated to mention him. There are so many unanswered questions here. Even like the Houston Rockets could be buyers, and by could be, they're probably buyers because they're worried about the here and now. And they've been so good at home this year. Were they 15-6 at home this season? And they did just beat the Bucks. That's a different story. They're another team that could buy. And so you look at these conferences, and in the East, there are 12 teams. The 1 seed through right now, the 12 seed, which is the Toronto Raptors. Those are all teams that can talk themselves into buying. And then you're in the West, and I think it's 1 through 11 for sure can talk themselves into buying. The Lakers are 11th right now. But the Grizzlies are 13th. They're kind of a wild card here. They have their own first-round picks. They have some mid-end salaries. If they want to get in for just a stopgap big who's also higher impact, maybe on an expiring contract or a contract they don't mind footing the bill in tandem with Steven Adams and or Brandon Clark next season, they can go after that. We know they need a wing. We know they can still use shooting, even though Luke Kennard is back in the lineup. They're a team that, yeah, their record doesn't show it, and they're probably just going to wind up in the play-in. They are 8 losses out of 6th place right now, and so the play-in is their best bet. But they're all about the now anyway. It's not going to change if they don't make a trade. So you might as well get in on sweepstakes of players you believe would be good fits beyond this season as well. And so I would say between the Jazz, I would say it's just the Jazz, the Blazers, and the Spurs. We just know that they're not going to buy. Except, oh, wait, the Spurs could kind of use a floor general, and Trey Jones and Wemby prove that, I feel like, 80 times a game, maybe. Could they just decide to get in on the Tyus Jones sweepstakes? Someone like that? Like, could they come in and scoop up one of these players that Tyus Jones is not someone you're banking to reach the buyout market? But if you're a contender, maybe you're looking to see if DeLon Wright's can reach the buyout market, or the Spurs just come and swoop in and say, hey, this fills a need. We have some contracts that fit it. The cost is so low. Let's go get him. They could sneak in there and do that. Utah could do that. I say that they're not going to be definitively buyers, but I would also advocate, if the price is right, they should be in on Dejounte Murray. That's a name that makes a lot of sense for them. They could also be sellers. And so this uncertainty, I think, is going to make for a very interesting dynamic that is going to clash. And what it all leads to wrap up the thesis of this argument, there is going to be, in my mind, I won't identify it. Maybe I'll throw out a couple scenarios here. There is going to be anywhere between 1 to like 3 or 4 firework moves that I just don't think we saw coming. And I'm not saying fireworks need to be, oh, the Pelicans traded Zion Williamson, another team that should be buying. by the way. They've decided, well, Brandon Ingram's playing so well. Zion's such a health risk, even though he's played well at points. We have all these lineup data that says we're great like this. I'm not saying it's going to be a move. I wouldn't bet on that. But there's going to be just someone we didn't see coming, or there's going to be a team that's forced into a decision that it otherwise wouldn't necessarily have made because, one, maybe the offer is just too good since there is a lack of sellers, or they just lose so much ground. Golden State is like a perfect example here. We know the Lakers what do they have to sell? They're not, unless Anthony Davis or LeBron James requested a trade, they're not going anywhere. The Warriors are a wild card in that instance, just like the Hawks or the Raptors, as much as the Bulls or the Nets. There's layers to the wild card status here too. Wendell Carter Jr. in Orlando, is he expendable because Goga Bitadze and Mo Wagner exist, apparently? And he was banged up this season, hasn't had the greatest season overall. Like that doesn't count as a selling move, but Wendell Carter Jr. is a player that would log a ton of minutes for a bunch of teams that might actually want him. And so that's someone who can both shift the landscape a little bit, and is just a name that we're not throwing around there in the mainstream that much. The mainstream-ish guy that I will be watching, just because now OG's off the board and there's so many teams that need this player and he provides more from scratch scoring, is Mikal Bridges. If they don't move him, I think we're either going to hear reports that they had these, like, what was it, 4 first-round picks last year for him? It wouldn't surprise me if there's more than that on the table. Like, the rumor is, however accurate it is. Or did they decide to get involved in the Pascal Siakam sweepstakes themselves? Or maybe even Dejounte Murray to get another creator in there? This trade deadline is, a lot of teams, a lot of fan bases will be unhappy, as always, because if you're a Kings fan, if you're a Pacers fan, you're going to be linked to players, and you're either not going to get those players, or maybe you don't do anything. Like, even I'm a big advocate of just a Jayshawn Tate in Sacramento could make a world of difference, or even an Alex Caruso. You might not even make that type of a move if you're the Kings. It just might not be out there, and you're going to be very selective about your all-in moves. That's why I'm leery about the Siakam fit. From a talent perspective, if the Raptors don't want to move him, sure, do it, especially if you think he's going to stick around. But then you're using your best assets on not filling enough of your biggest needs in that scenario, and that creates some awkwardness moving forward. And I think you could look legitimately at 25 teams in the league and make a case for them to just be wild cards at the deadline. And the number might even be higher than that. The knowns for me are Charlotte. They will sell Hayward, Rozier. Maybe a smart team comes in, picks up Cody Martin. There's Washington. Just everyone except for Bilal Coulibaly should be open for business. I'd love to see a good team steal Denny Avdia. I know he just signed an extension, but poison pill, if you're not in the luxury tax anymore, working around the poison pill isn't as difficult via trade. But anyone not named Bilal Coulibaly is like not going to be bolted down at this point. So Charlotte and Washington, and that's it in the East, where it's like, I mean, Miami's a wild card to me where they won't sell, but I could just picture them doing nothing. I could also just picture them doing something huge, like we've all been waiting on, if the right name becomes available there. And then in the West, I would skew towards San Antonio is going to continue to play conservative, and they're more likely to look at, well, can we take on some additional money if we're going to trade Doug McDermott or Jetty Osman's expiring contract, or those just buyout candidate guys? I mean, even if they go out and get a floor generals, it's sort of like a young second or third draft guy rather than investing assets in a Tyus Jones. So they're going to be sellers or just stand patters. I think Portland, maybe they're a wild card in the sense, would they consider moving Matisse Thybulle? Would they consider moving Anthony Simons? Will they move Jeremy Grant? But it's pretty clearly they're at a stage in their development where it's, yeah, they're going to entertain offers. They're not going out there where I'm talking about the Jazz, who I would view as a wild card, or even the Grizzlies, where they're not going to do, these are teams that are probably not going to make any noise in the playoffs or the play-in or whatever. But they are still in Utah and Memphis could say, well, we like these players long-term and they're going to help us a lot now. We're going to go get them just because we have the assets to do it. Portland's not that team, that buying type team. So San Antonio, Portland, Washington, Charlotte, the end. I don't know what the fuck to expect from Detroit. They should be sellers, but I'm also not super impressed with what they have to sell off. Maybe another team wants to take a flyer on James Wiseman. There was, I can't remember if it was an OKC fan in our mentions, or no, it was a Memphis fan that really wanted to take a flyer on James Wiseman in the YouTube comments and said, like, what if we gave up a first? Please don't give up a first for James Wiseman. That was, I appreciate the optimism and the faith in him, but damn. So there are 4 teams that I think you look at and say, well, we know kind of the general idea of what they're going to do. And even Portland might just be a stretch there because they have, I would say, no fewer than 3 players that other good teams would really want. Anthony Simons, just one of the most underrated players. I think even when you look at his contract, oh, he's like a combo guard who's really only this pure scorer. Okay, no shit. He's making under 20% of the salary cap or whatever it is, and he can shoot the lights out. And I think his passing has gotten better over the past couple of years. That's a player that teams, that he would fit on a lot of teams. You imagine him in Orlando? What does Orlando look like with Anthony Simons? They have Jeremy Grant. They have Matisse Thybulle. Those are just some of the names that have circled. I cannot wait to go through the next month. And to me, it's less about the rumors that we hear and more, and this is always the case, but it's more about what actually happens, because there could be a huge discrepancy between what teams are doing and what they reported to do. And Toronto would be a perfect example. And we saw it last year. Where are they going to sell? No, they bought. And there could just be more instances of that, or the flip side of, well, more teams than normal could be convinced to sell. I'm looking at the Warriors just kind of short-circuiting their dynasty era, aging out. I'm looking at that's not really a great team. I'm looking at the Warriors as surprise sellers. Maybe that's the Hawks. I guess that we already know that they're sellers, but could we see the Nets? The Nets for sure are going to be up there. And none of this to say, I think some people are like, well, what about Cleveland and Donovan Mitchell? That's just, I can't picture that happening this season. And I just wouldn't do it if I was Cleveland either, quite frankly. But when you have teams that might be convinced to part with players they otherwise wouldn't, because the market just dictates like, all right, well, that's the way it crumbles. It also just wouldn't shock me. We see more young players kind of moved in advance of their next contracts, where it's, no, you keep these guys so they sign their next contract. You figure it out after that. Josh Giddey, Jalen Green, none of those are dudes that would shock me if they just got moved at the deadline. I guess Giddey a little bit because it's Oklahoma City. And so this trade deadline has the chance to be one of the more interesting ones that we've seen, even if I would say right now, based on the realistic names that are available, Pascal Siakam is the best player that could get moved. Let's say he doesn't get moved. Let's say Zach LaVine doesn't get moved. Let's also say Dejounte Murray and Lauri Markkanen don't get moved. And let's say Mikal Bridges stays put. Just me mentioning those names is probably going to disappoint people. There's still going to be a ton of movement. There's still going to be a lot of unforeseen moves. There's still going to be teams going for it that we didn't expect to go for it, even if it's not with this season in mind, which is where maybe a Memphis comes in. It could could be where the Lakers or the Warriors come in at this point. It's certainly where the Jazz would come in there. And maybe the Spurs just back their way into this. And so I would just caution anyone. One, the rumor stuff, it's just, please try and keep in mind like where the information might be coming from. And if you're not seeing people on the regular report and they're all of a sudden reporting now, like if you want to dunk on them, quote tweet them, or make screenshot and make fun of it, I totally get it. But you don't need to read into it just because we're so desperate for slop this time of year. I would just brace for chaos and the unexpected is all. That's not like super sourced information. I would call it an educated guess. And maybe I'll be wrong because I'm wrong all the time and I'll come on and admit it. But this is going to be a wild, wacky, potentially bonkers deadline, which is fun. I know some people don't like the transaction side of this game, but it is part of this league. And it's a huge driver when it's engagement and fan interest. Does that speak to the league's failure of educating fans enough to where they're interested in the basketball being played? I would argue that we're at a point where, yes, some of the mainstream stuff is annoying and tired, but platforms are often given to the loudest people. And they're going to have some of the biggest platforms, which is just why they're so loud in the first place, because they're right in front of your face. I think that there actually is a pretty good balance when you're looking at the educated basketball fan on social media who cares about the X's and O's and really wants to get into the nitty gritty of the, the 45 angle cuts and things of that nature. But we are in the transaction part of the season. And so even if you're inclined to make fun of people who care about the trade stuff, and I try to care about everything. I will say some of my favorite analysis and podcasts to do. I think I have mentioned this before. It's not so much, I like reacting to rumors is fine. I love trying to fit pieces together after we know that they're together, where it's how does OG fit on the Knicks or quickly on the Raptors after those trades go down. That's some of my favorite analysis to do. I like trades. I like trade rumors. I'm not sorry. I also like watching basketball, believe it or not. I like also the stories that go beyond the basketball, where things that are happening off the court. Where was it Kelly Olynyk or who was it from the Jazz just recently? They rescued a dog or something. There was that fun story from Andy Larson. So this is a wild time of year. Proceed with caution, but my advice is a cliche, is that embrace for what you're not prepared to embrace, whether it's a team traveling in a certain direction or just players that I haven't even named. Like, I think people aren't mentioning Mikal Bridges only in sort of these offhanded comments. I'm thinking even outside that box where it's just name the player. It's, yes, there are there are maybe like 10 to 15 actually untouchable players, way more than that, who are uber unlikely to be moved. But like, I'll use the Knicks as an example. I wouldn't predict it. Julius Randle could be traded. Like, that is something that could actually happen. I wouldn't predict it midseason, just based off the way he's playing, how much they do need his shot creation now following the Emmanuel Quickley trade. But you also don't know who's coming back in that perspective type of deal, or what they're planning on doing as if they're step laddering their way to something different. But that's all I have on the trade deadline. If you've not done so already, please like this video on YouTube, subscribe, hit the sub button, join us. Our Discord, the link is in the podcast and YouTube description as well. If you're not subscribed on Apple or Spotify, do that. Leave us ratings and reviews across Apple, and then Spotify lets you leave ratings. Help drive that number up. It helps us with placement on the charts, and that should help other people find us as we continue to grow this community. Grant and I put a lot of effort into this podcast, into providing content. This is a 7 days a week thing when you look at, for both of us, when you look at the content planning that we're talking. I don't know, how many of our listeners who are listening to our long form content know how much of the effort that I'm putting into like the shorts and the clips that go up to try and draw in new viewers. And hopefully some of you are converting to the longer form content. We do a thorough job. We're fun as hell, personable as hell. I would argue, humble as hell, even though I think that's the antithesis of me saying that we're fun as hell, and then humble as hell is probably, and is like the opposite of humility, but whatever. Until next time. And as always, I do the shout out to the one, the only, the legendary, won't be moved because he's untouchable, but also injured, Frank Ntilikina.